What if I told you that right now, as you watch this video, a material that holds the modern world together is quietly vanishing from the global supply chain? Not in a year, not in 5 years, right now. This material is in your car. It's in the plane you last flew on. It's wrapping the food in your refrigerator. It's inside the power lines running to your home, the smartphone in your hand, and the building above your head. You interact with it dozens of times every single day, and you never even notice. It's aluminium. And what's happening to it right now should terrify every government, every manufacturer, and every consumer on the planet. Because a conflict erupting in one of the most volatile regions on Earth has not just disrupted the aluminium supply chain, it has physically destroyed it. And the shock waves are already moving through global markets toward your daily life. The question is not whether this is going to affect you. The question is how bad it will get before the world wakes up. Stay with me, because this is one of those moments where understanding what's happening right now could make all the difference. Welcome back to Global Updates 24, the channel where we cut through the noise and bring you the stories that actually matter before the rest of the world catches up. If you're new here, now is the perfect time to hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and join a community of people who want to stay ahead of the curve. And if you've been here before, smash that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Because trust me, this is not a story you want your people missing. Today, we are breaking down something that has been quietly unfolding behind the headlines of geopolitical conflict, energy markets, and global trade. A crisis that started as a whisper at the beginning of 2026 and has now grown into a full-throated alarm. And almost nobody is talking about it. Until now. Let's rewind to January of this year. At the start of 2026, if you were following global commodity markets, all eyes were on one metal, copper. Analysts, investors, and traders were all convinced that copper was heading into a historic supply crunch. Money poured into the market. Prices surged. The narrative was compelling. Rising demand from electric vehicles, renewable energy infrastructure, and the green transition, all colliding with limited supply. It was copper's moment. But then something happened that nobody expected. The copper shortage didn't materialize the way the market predicted. Global exchange stocks of copper actually climbed to multi-year highs, closing March at just over 1.4 million metric tons, a mountain of surplus metal that quietly extinguished the bullish fire. LME 3-month copper ended the quarter around $12,300 per ton. 15% below its January peak and essentially flat on the year. The great copper crisis fizzled out. But while every trader's eyes were locked on copper, something far more dangerous was developing in the shadows. A real crisis, not a predicted one, not a speculative one, but a physical, tangible, undeniable crisis. And it was happening in aluminium. The trigger? The escalating conflict in the Persian Gulf, specifically the war involving Iran, now in its 5th week as we record this, has begun tearing apart one of the most critical industrial supply chains in the entire world. Metal traders who started the year worrying about copper ended the first quarter staring down a very real and very imminent aluminium supply catastrophe. Now, to understand why this is so serious, you need to understand something fundamental about aluminium that most people don't know. Unlike iron or copper, aluminium doesn't come out of the ground in a form that can be easily turned into a usable product. It starts as bauxite ore, which must go through a multi-stage chemical process. First, the bauxite is treated with caustic soda to strip out impurities, producing a substance called alumina. Then that alumina is subjected to an extraordinarily energy-intensive electrolysis process, where enormous quantities of electricity are used to separate the metal and produce raw aluminium. This process is not just complex, it is absolutely dependent on a continuous, stable, and cheap supply of electricity. The moment that electricity supply is interrupted, even briefly, the consequences are catastrophic. The molten metal inside the smelter can solidify, destroying equipment and requiring months of work and enormous resources just to restart production. This makes aluminium one of the most vulnerable industrial materials on the planet when it comes to energy disruptions. So where do you build aluminium smelters? You build them where energy is cheap and plentiful. And for decades, that answer has been the Persian Gulf. The Gulf region is extraordinarily rich in natural gas, much of it produced as a byproduct of oil extraction. Rather than flaring or exporting all of this gas, Gulf nations have channeled it into domestic power generation, creating some of the cheapest electricity costs in the world. On the back of that cheap energy, they built massive world-class aluminium smelting facilities. Today, the Persian Gulf accounts for approximately 9% of total global smelting capacity and a staggering 18% of global aluminium exports outside of China. That is not a minor player. That is a cornerstone of the global aluminium supply chain. And right now, that cornerstone is cracking. The initial blow came from the Strait of Hormuz, that narrow but vital waterway through which an enormous volume of global energy and industrial trade flows every single day. As conflict in the region escalated, shipping through the strait became severely constrained. Smelters in the Gulf that depend on imported inputs, particularly alumina, suddenly found themselves struggling to secure the raw materials needed to keep production running. At the same time, their ability to export finished aluminium to global buyers was dramatically reduced. Supply tightened almost overnight. But it didn't stop there. It got far worse. Iranian missile strikes directly targeted Gulf aluminium infrastructure. Alba, the giant smelter in Bahrain, was hit and is now operating at just 30% of its capacity. The massive Al Tawila smelter, operated by Emirates Global Aluminium, one of the largest aluminium production facilities in the entire world, is completely out of action after severe damage to its power plant. According to Wood Mackenzie, one of the world's leading energy and metals consultancies, this is a crisis that no one saw coming, and the shock waves are already running down the supply chain. Let that sink in for a moment. One of the biggest aluminium smelters on Earth is completely offline. Another is running at less than a third of its capacity. And there are 6 major smelters in total across Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Qatar, the UAE, and Oman. All of them now operating under the shadow of ongoing conflict, with power infrastructure, gas pipelines, and logistical routes under sustained pressure. If current trends continue, multiple additional facilities could be forced offline in the coming weeks. The combined effect would remove a staggering amount of aluminum from global markets at precisely the moment when demand remains high and alternatives are limited. Now, here's something important to understand about aluminum that actually sounds reassuring at first and then stops being reassuring very quickly. Aluminum is highly recyclable. In fact, around 30% of global aluminum supply already comes from recycled scrap. Recycling is relatively simple. Melt it down, reform it, and it's ready to use again. That sounds like a safety valve. But here's the problem. Recycled aluminum depends on the availability of scrap metal. You cannot magically conjure more scrap into existence overnight. The remaining 70% of global supply comes from primary production, that energy-intensive smelting process we just described. When primary production collapses, you cannot simply ramp up recycling to fill the gap. The scrap isn't there in sufficient quantities, and even if it were, recycling infrastructure has its own capacity limits. The buffer is real, but it is not nearly large enough to absorb a shock of this magnitude. And now let's layer on the broader economic picture, because this is where the situation becomes truly complex. The same conflict driving aluminium supply disruptions is also driving energy prices higher across the board. Surging energy costs increase production expenses for manufacturers in every sector, which can soften demand for aluminium in some industries as economic activity slows. But here's the cruel twist. Those same rising energy costs make it harder and more expensive for aluminium producers in other parts of the world, Europe, North America, elsewhere, to ramp up their own production to compensate for Gulf losses. You have a situation where supply is falling, and the mechanisms that might replace that supply are simultaneously becoming more expensive and difficult to activate. The market is now caught in a vice. Supply down, replacement capacity constrained, demand still present, prices rising. Physical aluminium buyers in Western markets are already feeling it. Prices are climbing, not just on paper at exchanges like the London Metal Exchange, but in the real physical markets where companies actually secure the metal they need to build things. Premiums, the extra cost buyers pay over the benchmark price to actually get their hands on physical metal, are increasing sharply. That's the market's way of screaming that supply is tightening and the situation is getting urgent. Here is the bottom line, and it's important to state this clearly. Even if hostilities in the Persian Gulf were to end tomorrow, and there is no sign of that, the damage already done to aluminum infrastructure cannot be undone quickly. Repairing a damaged smelter, restoring a destroyed power plant, rebuilding logistics and shipping routes. These are not weeks-long projects. They are months-long, sometimes years-long undertakings. The loss of key production assets in the Gulf is, as industry experts are now saying openly, going to be felt for many months to come, regardless of what happens next geopolitically. The world is not facing a theoretical future shortage of aluminum. The world is facing an actual, real-time, ongoing reduction in aluminum supply that is already cascading through supply chains. Car manufacturers, aerospace companies, construction firms, packaging producers, power infrastructure builders. Everyone who depends on aluminum is now operating in a market that is structurally tighter than it was 6 months ago. And it is likely to get tighter still. This is the story that the financial media is beginning to cover, but that hasn't yet broken through into mainstream awareness. And that gap between when something starts happening and when the general public realizes it's happening is exactly the window where understanding matters most. Whether you're an investor, a business owner, a manufacturer, or just someone who wants to understand the forces shaping the world you live in, this is a development you need to be watching closely. Aluminium shortages are not coming. They are already here. The question now is how deep this goes and how long it lasts. We will be tracking this story closely here on Global Updates 24 and bringing you updates as the situation develops. So if you haven't subscribed yet, do it right now. Hit that subscribe button so you never miss a critical update. If this video helped you understand something important today, please give it a like. It helps more people find this channel and stay informed. And share this with someone who needs to know what's happening. Because in a world moving this fast, information is everything. Thank you for watching Global Updates 24. Stay informed, stay ahead, and we'll see you in the next one.